be talking about finding the x and y intercepts of a linear graph or equation. And we'll be able to use these to help us graph the equation or learn some other important principles about a particular equation. So let's get started. So first of all, the x and y intercepts of a graph are where the graph crosses the x and y axis. So at the y-intercept, as you can see, the x value is 0, and the y value will be whatever the value is at that crossing point. The x-intercept, on the other hand, is where the line crosses the x-axis, and so you'll have a value for x at that point, but the y value will be 0. So those are two distinct characteristics of the x and y intercept. One of the coordinates is going to be a 0. And that's going to help us in solving some of these. So again, those are called the x-intercept and the y-intercept. So like we said, each intercept has a 0 as one of its coordinates. So let's identify this particular x and y intercept. So let's start with the x-intercept. And I'll grab a little marker here so we can write it down. Okay, so the x-intercept is this point right here. So let's count over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that is the point x is 5 and y is 0. So that's the x-intercept, 5, 0. How about the y-intercept? Let's look at that one. Well, that's up 1, 2, 3, 4. So the y value there is 4. So our coordinates are going to be 0, 4 of that point. Now when we write an equation in slope-intercept form and we write down the y-intercept, we only use the y value in that particular application. All right, let's try a couple more. How about the x-intercept in this problem? Well, the x-intercept is back 2 and up and down 0, so that's going to be -2, 0. And the y-intercept, well, that's straight up 2 and over 0, so that's going to be 0, 2. That is the y-intercept on that particular example. Okay, when we write the equation in y equals mx plus b form, b is the y-intercept. As you can see, as we mentioned just a few moments ago, we're only using the non-zero coordinate of that point when we use this format. So I want to kind of keep that straight in your minds. Okay, so to summarize then, when a graph crosses the x-axis, it's called the y-intercept. I said x-axis, I meant y-axis. When a line crosses the x-axis, that is called the x-intercept. So let's try a couple more. What would be the x-intercept right here? Now, it looks like it crosses right there. So the x-intercept would be -2, 0. And the y-intercept, this point right here, would be 0, 1. Just two known points we can see along that line. Some graphs only have one intercept. For example, this one, you've got a slope of 0, and it only has a line that crosses the y-axis. So it only has one intercept, and that's at 0, 5. And that's it. What about a vertical line? Well, that would have just an x value, 0. And so if we look really close, this x value is actually crossing at 1.5. So our x-intercept would be 1.5, 0 on that line. All right, keep moving along. How do we find the intercepts if we only have the equation instead of a graph? Well, here's an example equation that hasn't been solved for y yet. But what we do to make the x, or to find the x-intercept, or the y-intercept, we start out by first making one of the x values or the y values equal to 0, and then solving the equation for the other one that hasn't been substituted in for 0. So on the first one, let's just put in 0 for x and then solve for y. So do you see how we put a 0 in for x right here? Well, anything times 0 is just 0, right? So now we just do, we have 3y equals 6. And then to solve that, we're just going to divide both sides by 3. And when we do that, we end up with y equals 2. So the y-intercept is 2. Or if we do the coordinate, 0, 2. What about for the y-intercept, or excuse me, the x-intercept? So for the x-intercept, we plug 0 in for y, like we did in this case. So we just plug in a 0. 3 times 0 is 0. So we're just left with 2x equals 6. And when we divide both sides by 2, we end up with an x-intercept of 3. So that coordinate would be 3, 0. So that's how you find the x and the y-intercept. Let's try a few more. There's one. So let's take let's start out by making y equal to 0. So we'll come over here and write down 7x plus 14 times 0 equals 28. And of course this cancels out, leaving us with 7x equals 28. So when we divide both sides by 7, we end up with x equals 4. So the x-intercept is 4, 0. That's the coordinates of that point, 4, 0. How about the y-intercept? Well, for the y-intercept, we're going to let x equal to 0, so we'll go 7 times 0 plus 14y equals 28. That cancels out. We divide both sides by 14, and we end up with y equals 2. So the coordinate of the y-intercept is 0, 2. All right, so that's the process for finding the x and y-intercept when you just have a graph. How about this one? So let's find the x-intercept. Well, so we'll have negative 3x plus 5 times 0, because we plug in 0 for y when we're looking for the x-intercept. That cancels, and we divide both sides by negative 3. And we end up with x equals negative 5. Wow, that's pretty straightforward, huh? How about the y-intercept? Well, we're going to plug in 0 for x then. And we're going to solve this equation for y. And so this cancels out front. We divide both sides by 5. And we get y equals 3. So our y-intercept is 0, 3. Our x-intercept was negative 5, 0. All right. Now, on a couple of problems that you're going to see on the assignment today, you're actually going to have to graph these intercepts after you find them. So let's show you what that looks like. So again, we're finding the x-intercept. We're going to let y equal to 0. So we'll have 2x minus 7 times 0 equals 14. 7 times 0 is 0. So our equation reduces down to 2x equals 14. Divide by 2. So our x-intercept is equal to 7. And then the y-coordinate is 0, as we did show it up here. So let's go ahead and graph that. Over 7, up 0. There's the x-intercept. Let's find the y-intercept. So we will put in a 0 for x this time and resolve the same equation, this time for y. This cancels out, and I'm left with negative 7y equals 14. Divide both sides by negative 7, and that's going to give us a y-intercept of negative 2. So we come down to negative 2 and 0. There's our y-intercept, and then we just sketch a line between the two. And there we go. So that's how you find your x and y intercept, sketch a line through the graphed points, and you got your answer. Let's try one last one. So this one is negative 2.5x plus 5y. So let's see how this looks. So we're going to plug in 0 for y, which would cancel that out. Then we divide both sides by negative 2.5. Negative 2.5. So that would give us x equals, and 10 divided by negative 2.5 turns out to be negative 4. So our x-intercept is negative 4 and 0. All right, so as long as we're doing this a little bit differently this time, now we can erase what we've got here and do this over again. Only this time, instead of making y equal to 0, we're going to make x equal to 0. So let's do that. So negative 2.5 times 0 plus 5y equals 10. That cancels out. We divide both sides now by 5. And we end up with y equals 2. So the y-intercept is going to be at 2, 0. Okay. Then we grab a little straight line of some kind and we sketch a line between those 2 points. And there's our graph. Simple as that. So this, I know that everything that we're doing here is a little bit new, maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not difficult, and keep at it. You'll do fine. Thank you very much. So your assignment is finding and graphing using intercepts on Alex.